Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Johnny's Ambassadors Expert Webinar Series for Parents. I'm your host, Laura Stack, the CEO and founder of Johnny's Ambassadors. Many of you have been on our series before, and we have several new faces today, so welcome. Johnny's Ambassadors is a 501c3. We educate teens and parents about the dangers of today's high-potency marijuana products on adolescent brain development, mental illness, and suicide ideation. We have another expert, wonderful guest with us today, whom I will introduce in just a moment. After I go over a couple quick logistics, this session is being recorded. Please share it with your friends and family. Kevin has kindly provided a handout of his slides, as well as 2 additional educational resources, which you can find in the control panel and or the page where you are watching this video. He is going to present some slides for about 45 minutes, after which he will take questions. So please type those into the question box as you think of them, and I will read those off to him at the end. So without any further ado, I am delighted to introduce Kevin Sabet, who is described by NBC as the prodigy of drug politics and policy. Kevin Sabet, Ph.D., is an author, consultant, former advisor to 3 U.S. presidential administrations, assistant professor, and serves as the president and CEO of SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which he founded with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy in 2013. He has studied, researched, written about, and implemented drug policy for almost 20 years. He has worked in the Clinton, Bush administrations, and in 2011, stepped down after serving more than 2 years as the senior advisor to President Obama's drug control director, having been the only drug policy staffer to have ever served as a political appointee in a Democrat and Republican administration. He has been featured on the front page of the New York Times and virtually every major media publication, and is going to be in the news a lot coming up here starting Tuesday, because on April 20th, 2021, he will be the author of Smokescreen, What the Marijuana Industry Doesn't Want You to Know. Yay, I'm wearing my green so we can match the cover of his title. Kevin, thank you for being here, and congratulations on the publication of Smokescreen.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just in awe of the work that you have been doing in such a short amount of time. The number of people you've gotten together, the experts. I'm joining an incredibly austere group here, wonderful group. People like Robin Murray and so many other wonderful giants of our field. So I'm very humbled to have been invited. So thank you.
Thank you. We're honored. Take care. I'll let you go
Thanks.
now.
All right. Well, I'm very excited to see all of you, and thank you so much for tuning in. There's so many wonderful webinars that we've seen in this series, and so I'm not sure if I'm going to be adding that much to them, but I am very excited to talk about Smokescreen, What the Marijuana Industry Doesn't Want You to Know, which is my new book, which comes out on Tuesday. You can order it now. It's in hardcover for now. It'll be in paperback probably later in the year, I hope, but many of you, I've already gotten some questions, and people were asking, and we'll do formal questions at the end, but people were asking, why I wrote this book. And I'm going to talk about that on this webinar. But in the beginning, I just want to talk a little bit about SAM, which is the nonprofit organization that I head up. We're an evidence-based marijuana policy organization that prioritizes public health. So we're nonpartisan, but we were co-founded by some very high-profile people that you see in the news all the time. Former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, as well as David Frum, who's George Bush's primary speechwriter in the early 2000s, now the editor of The Atlantic magazine. We are advised and really driven by a very select group of scientific advisors from the top universities around the country, people who have been researching and know this issue backwards and forwards, the premier experts in their field. And we've been very active in the press. You've probably seen that. We collaborate with multiple organizations like Johnny's Ambassadors, but also like the American Medical Association, Academy of Pediatrics, on and on and on, in almost every state in the country. So we're and also various countries. So We're trying to get the message out. We were started about 8 years ago. And this is really has been a product of the whole SAM staff, I have to say. This is not just my book. This is everybody's book, including Patrick's, who wrote the foreword. You can scan if you want to get the website now and get some freebies if you order it before Tuesday. But you know, many of you know I wrote a book called Reefer Sanity: 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. That was written in 2013. And, you know, with that book, I basically, as fast as I could, wanted to write a book about the harms of marijuana, you know, right after I left the White House. It was really my chance after leaving government to write what I wanted to write, do what I wanted to do, get it out as fast as I could, and spread it as far as I could. And I presented that book to every single state in the country, literally probably about 30 to 40 countries around the world, the UN, on and on. The point was to really spread the word as fast as we could, because of the growing acceptance of marijuana that was going on, you know, that's been going on for the last 20 or 30 years. This book is very different in terms of how I approached it. You know, with this book, I had a number of people approaching me over the last, I would say, really 3 or 4 years to talk about how legalization has been impacting them personally. And so Reefer Sanity was about a lot of factoids and statistics. And although I have many facts and stats in here, in fact, I think I have 350 citations, so it's not without that. But it's not a book, it's not just a fact book. It's really a book of stories. And we've seen from Laura, we've seen the power of stories. We've seen the real power of this. And so this has kind of been a long time coming. In fact, if I met Laura, you know, earlier than when I did, no doubt about it, she'd have her own chapter in this book. It was too late by the time that happened. It's too bad. Maybe the next edition, because her story and we want to remember Johnny was so powerful. But this is a book of stories. These are stories that sadly are very reminiscent of Laura's story, and these are stories that are also new, that I think people have not been hearing about at all. And that's really what I want to go into in this presentation. I'm not going to talk about each and every chapter. I'm going to talk about just a few of, I think, the poignant chapters that I think highlight, sort of reflect the magnitude and the content of this book. And then I want to leave plenty of time for questions, because I always think shorter is better. You know, so in the prologue, I introduce you to a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they were exposed to marijuana and are continuing to be exposed in ways that I had never heard of before. So they're not using marijuana, I'll tell you that, but they are exposed, and I'm not going to give it away. That part of this is I'd like you to sort of be, I'm going to give you a teaser on some of this stuff, and if you find it interesting, I hope you can get the book. But you know, the point is, we are learning about different exposures that small children, because normally we talk about teenagers, right? We talk about when someone started using when they were 12, 13, 14, 15, or young adults. We don't really talk about kids in the single digits. And now, as a father of a child in the single digits, this is something that just struck me in a dramatic way after I interviewed a mother and interviewed these small children. And we are hearing about this kind of exposure, though, all over the country, again, in ways that you may not think about. One way, which is, by the way, not the way that the kids in the book were exposed, but another way we're seeing is the issue of secondhand smoke, and really thirdhand smoke too, which we have not been hearing enough about. And when you look at these new studies, for example, out of the largest public housing corporation in the country, the New York City Housing Authority, and you see the studies that marijuana smoke is significantly more prevalent than cigarette smoke, and that it's just generally just very prevalent, and you hear young teenagers talk about how it's everywhere. I think this highlights this issue of exposure, an issue of the victims, of the non-users, because we always hear about the right of the people using, right? We hear about whether it's for medicine, they have to have the right, or whether it's their own personal decision, or this incredible term, and so many terms that the marijuana industry has come up with that I gotta hand it to them, because they did an excellent PR. But this incredible term, adult use marijuana, which you might have heard about. You know, it's crazy to me. We don't have adult use alcohol. We would never say adult use alcohol. We would never say adult use OxyContin. or adult use cigarettes, but we say adult use marijuana, implying that only adults are going to be using it if you legalize it, which is hogwash, obviously. But the point is, we are seeing more and more of these victims. So I talk about that, I highlight that. The other thing that happened a couple of years ago, really when I first started researching, interviewing, traveling around the country and writing this book, which again was a lot harder than my first, which was just putting my brain down on paper, checking some notes on the internet, making sure I have my facts right. This was not like that. This was really having to listen to dozens and dozens of people. Unfortunately, I could not include all of them. But a group of people I did include in chapter 2 and by the way, these are not necessarily the names of the chapters. These are names that I put on for this presentation and for these presentations, because I think that it's poignant in a way, but it encapsulates it maybe even better. But if you go to chapter 2, we're talking about really regrets, and regrets not from necessarily people who used a lot of marijuana, although some of them did. But the point is regrets about their position on the drug, how they feel about it, more than, whether they use it or not, which is kind of, sort of superfluous in this context, because I talked to people and people approached me who were major industry insiders and lobbyists, and they talked to me about what happened and why they changed their tune. And so I think it's poignant because we always hear, oh, there's, Coloradans haven't voted to reverse marijuana legalization, so they all must love it. Whereas, of course, we know there are a lot of variables that go into laws being enacted or changed or reversed or whatnot. It's not just about how people necessarily feel. There's plenty of things people feel that are not law. Plenty of things people don't feel that are law. So that's not really, for better or worse, the key variable. There's many variables about why we have laws. Unfortunately, money is a bigger variable than belief. And I had a couple of people approach me that really did have regrets about their role. And so I go through that. Some of them had regrets because of the public health issues that we've been seeing. And, I'm not going to be highlighting a ton of them here, but I'm highlighting some of them. Of course, we know that the public health impact, the poison control calls, the emergency room admissions, et cetera, have been huge. And this really led, and I'm sort of skipping back and forth here, but I'm doing that on purpose. This led to essentially a group of whom I call whistleblowers approach me more or less out of nowhere. Or maybe they were referred to me. Somebody said, Kevin, you need to talk to this person. Or I got an email or phone call from an anonymous number that I almost didn't pick up. And I'm so glad that I did pick up in one case. But these are people who essentially, in my opinion, are blowing the whistle on this industry, are revealing their secrets for the first time. And I'm not an investigative reporter. I'm not a journalist by trade. It's really sad that we have not seen a lot of investigative reporting really about anything, and that's probably why we haven't, but especially about this issue. This issue seems to draw reporters that are more interested in talking about why marijuana is mainstream and it's a good thing, and maybe there's some science against it, but it's really undetermined, that kind of thing, rather than those who are really, and there are some that are, so I'm oversimplifying, and they've done other stories, but these kinds of stories that I'm revealing in the book, we should have been hearing about this a long time ago but we haven't. And so really for the first time, I'm revealing people, and they're using their real names, because one of the conditions that was really, it wasn't a formal condition I had, but it was really something that I was hoping would happen. And in every case in the book, it did happen. In one case, someone used their middle name, but in general, people not in general, the rest of the book, everybody used their real names, because, this issue draws so many conspiracy theorists and naysayers who essentially say that, well, this is, you're making it up and this is wrong. And let me tell you my story, which contradicts that, and yours can't be verified, on and on. And I needed them all to be verified, because let me tell you, this book is going to go under more scrutiny, I know, than really anything we've done, especially because, we think we can maybe, without jinxing it, I'm going to say this, maybe hit a bestseller list. And if that's the case, we're going to get a ton of scrutiny. And so whether we get scrutiny or not, it's important to be truthful and to be as transparent as possible. And that's what these whistleblowers talk to me in detail about how legalization in their state has gone wrong, how the results, the lab results of the THC products are wrong, how they were told by their higher ups not to pursue international cartels in one of the cases. Incredible stories. And obviously the stories we're hearing about pesticides and additives and molds and contamination, we have seen some news about this. I'm not going to say there's been none, but really for the first time, we have kind of people coming forward and saying this. The other thing I talk about in the book that I have talked about a lot, and really the founding of SAM, was not because we're against people who use marijuana. That's not the founding of SAM. The founding of SAM is that we're exposing this predatory industry and trying to stop it from becoming the next big tobacco. And by definition, I think legalization in this country equals commercialization. I mean, we've never legalized something in a tame way in this country. We are voracious consumers and marketers and commercializers. And that is exactly the thing I'm trying to expose in this book. People will be shocked to know, for example, that Juul started out as a marijuana company and is actually an offshoot of a marijuana company. People will be shocked to know how involved mainstream companies are that they have heard of in shaping the legalization of marijuana. And this is something that I was very, very adamant that we had to expose and exploit. So we went through Freedom of Information Act requests. We went through, anything we could to expose this. We went to marijuana industry events, kind of undercover, and heard what they had to say, and talked about political donations and the kinds of things that, again, you would really expect to be out there more, but unfortunately isn't. There isn't enough about this industry. And in fact, we highlight this industry on our website, learnaboutsam.org, which I should have said in the beginning is, I think, one of the best resources online for exposing the industry and exposing the lies of marijuana being safe and harmless. And it's on there all for free. If you go to our industry profiles, you'll see this. You'll see what we do to expose them. And on and on. There has been, of course, some of this is very public. They want it to be public because they're investing in it, billions of dollars. I have to say this, that Forbes finally said I might be right. Like it or not, big tobacco is invading cannabis. I mean, that was their exact quote. So I kind of thought that was cool because, often the media wants to say that we're wrong. Fourth largest tobacco company on earth investing in big marijuana. There are a lot of these stories we talk about. The alcohol industry, you should know, is heavily investing in marijuana. And what are they investing in? Not just marijuana, folks. They're investing in heavy users. They require heavy users to make their money. This isn't about the baby boomers saying, let's use once when our kids move out. Now that our kids are grown and we have grandkids, we can use a little marijuana when they're not around. That's not how the industry makes money. I mean, of course, they would love those people to be heavy users, but the industry makes money when you are a heavy user. And 9 times out of 10, literally, actually 9.5 times out of 10, you are only a heavy user if you start when you're young. That's why they really rely on young people using. And so, in this country, in the state of Colorado, for example, 30% of all users consumed 87% of the marijuana. So it's really important to understand that this is really about high levels of consumption. It's not just about THC. It is about that, and I talk about that, and I'll talk about it. But it's more than high potency THC. It's the level of consumption. Because if it was just high potency THC once a year, there would be a lot to worry about, because there would be things like emergency room admissions, which, by the way, there are over 655,000. That was the last count of emergency room admissions from people marijuana related. That's basically a major panic attack from high potency pot. But it's not just high potency pot once a month, once a year. It's high potency pot 4 times a day for 25 days out of 30. That level of consumption we have never seen in the history of this country. Even in the 1970s, when we saw a lot of prevalence, we saw a lot of daily users, but we did not see multiple times a day with multiple orders of maybe an order of magnitude higher level of THC. And this is where we're saying this THC level is just in areas we had never seen before. When we're talking about an order of magnitude, that's a very, very big deal, because we're not just talking about the old plant. We're not talking about the joint. We are talking about these major high potency products, which Johnny's Ambassadors has done a very good job of exploiting and exposing. The other chapter that again, I could talk about this, for a long time, but we have limits on our time here, and I want to get to questions. But the other chapter that really did hit home is this chapter on social justice. Actually, the title of that chapter is Perpetuating Social Injustice. And, I highlight some heroes, some people who have used grit and a couple $100 that they were able to scrounge together to change major local policy. So this is actually a picture of my friends, James and Charmaine Hayes, really heroes in Compton, California. I talk about their story. I talk about a guy you know of, I think if you know Sam, named Will Jones, who I talk about his challenges. I talk about the fact that you have a predatory industry targeting people of color, and specifically really disenfranchised people in vulnerable communities. First of all, this lie that if we only treated it like alcohol, that would be good from a criminal justice point of view couldn't be worse, because there are twice as many arrests. If you're worried about people getting arrested and giving them a record, you don't want to treat it like alcohol. There's twice as many arrests for alcohol than marijuana in this country. Alcohol is legal, yeah, but you still get arrested for DUI, for using in public, for selling to minors, all kinds of things. That's twice as many than all marijuana related arrests. And we're still seeing the disproportionate arrests that are really occurring and ongoing in places like Colorado, in other states. And we are not seeing reductions in the prison population. We are seeing increases often. The only reductions we're seeing is when you actually implement, for example, a parole reform program or another criminal justice reform program, which I applaud. I think we need to reduce our prison populations. I think we can do that and still be safe. We have to do it in a smart way. But the idea that it's all about marijuana, or frankly, even drug offenses, and this may sound controversial, but you should look up how many people are in prison in your state for drugs alone, drug possession alone, okay? Sales is different, but drug possession alone. In Washington State the other day, they just commuted every single sentence, let people out of prison who were there for drug possession. Do you know how many people that was? It was 100 people. Now, I get it. 100 people is still 100 families and 100 lives. I'm not trivializing them, but what I'm saying is that's not going to change your prison population from any significant perspective. It'll change those people's lives, and that's good, but it will not change the percentage of people really in prison. We have to think much broader and bigger, sometimes have tough conversations, because oftentimes these are violent crimes that are the reason why people are in prison for longer. So we have to have those tough conversations, which we should have. And there are many organizations like the Council on Criminal Justice, like Pew, like Right on Crime, smart justice initiatives that are doing this. And there's drug courts and all kinds of things that we need to look at as alternatives. But the idea that legalizing marijuana gets us there is patently false. Again, in Colorado alone, there are more African Americans now being arrested, and you're more likely, 21% more likely, to be arrested than white people for what Coloradan police call on-view arrests or public use. So again, the idea that this just goes away is wrong. And by the way, the idea that it's somehow Black communities that are making money from this is totally false. If somebody could say, well, Kevin, we have a couple more arrests, but really we're seeing black people make a lot more money, and they're being prosperous, and they're able to gain employment and get jobs and be, okay, well, all right, we could have that conversation maybe, but the real issue is, folks, that's not happening at all. It's not helping people of color. It is not happening. And Pew just put out a thing earlier this year, Black-owned pot businesses remain rare despite diversity efforts. I mean, many states are putting tons of money, by the way, so there goes your revenue, into diversity efforts, grants and basically affirmative action programs for people in this industry. It's not working. because you need connections, you need well-established ties. Felony records don't help. Coming from a poor background doesn't help. Not knowing anybody in the banking industry doesn't help. Not being able to pay off politicians, I hate to say it like that, but it's true, that doesn't help either. And so it's just not happening. And the marijuana industry has admitted it's not happening themselves. So we're just not seeing it at all. And we're seeing these businesses targeted in areas in neighborhoods of color. You've seen this. Luke has presented this before. He did a great job a couple of months ago. That when you look at where this is concentrated, we are seeing this in high levels in communities of color. Now let's talk a little bit. One of the funnest experiences I had is this issue of the marijuana underground, meaning, this idea, which is true, that drug dealers are not going away after legalization. So I actually interviewed a drug dealer in the book. I don't want to give away too much, but it was an interesting experience, and it's there. And guess what? They're making more money now than they were before their state legalized. We shouldn't be surprised about that. You can undercut the legal price. If you're a dealer, you can be open whenever you want. You can sell the kids. You can prosper on the gray market because maybe you can't produce these gummies and edibles and waxes and all of that, but you can buy them and then you can sell them and you can still make money. Getting worse, not better. The illegal pot market is booming in California despite legalization. This is from the New York Times, which has not necessarily been friendly to anti-drug activists in terms of their editorial position. And yet they are out there saying this is getting worse. We shouldn't be surprised, folks. We have never seen more availability of legal drugs diminishing the power of drug cartels or the illicit market. Look at tobacco. I mean, it's more than a $500 billion business still, the underground market. These cartels are involved in legal activities as well, logging and mining. They can push their illegality under the cover of legality. And this is happening left and right in the marijuana industry. And we should be asking these questions because only a minority of marijuana from any given state is sold legally. The majority are sold illegally. The other thing I do in the book is talk a little bit about what I would say is the inside story of some of my experiences in the Obama administration. I had never really talked about that. When I served in the Clinton and Bush administration, they weren't at the levels as when I was in the Obama administration. And so it was very interesting to go through that, even in my head, and recount that because I've never talked about a lot of this stuff publicly. So I am very proud of it. I'm very proud of the time we did in the Obama administration. The things we did to push back might surprise you, but you can take a look at it. Again, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So I was hoping to get this done in about half an hour, which I think I did. You can go to smokescreenbook.com. You can go to Amazon. You can go to any website. All the booksellers are selling it. I will say that I'm very proud to have support from multiple people, whether it's the former U.S. Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, who admits that this is not your mother's marijuana. The marijuana of today is significantly more potent. Whether it's the current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, Vivek has done great work in this when he was Obama's Surgeon General, and now as Biden's, the marijuana issue isn't as salient now in terms of, top of mind, because obviously we're going through a major global pandemic, which, really requires our attention. But it is very important to hear that this is not a partisan issue. Science is science, and you have two scientists who serve under two different parties saying the same thing. This is addictive, this is harmful, and public policy, I love how Vivek put it here, is outpacing science. Public policy is not where science is. The science shows one thing, public policy is showing something else. Now, I will want to say, I think it's important to put these last couple slides up. This doesn't mean that if you are in a legal state that you can't do anything. There are a lot of things you could do. In fact, there's a movement in Colorado, which we very much support, trying to limit THC concentration, limit the edibles. And that should happen. We've been saying this for 8 years. The marijuana industry should not be serving on rule-making bodies to determine regulations. And unfortunately, they are in most states. And there is a revolving door of people leaving these regulatory bodies and going to these, you could say, marijuana law firms or marijuana rule-making bodies. And that's wrong. That should not happen. Pot advertising and promotion should be prohibited. Science-based public awareness campaigns should be implemented across multiple media. and drug driving prevention should be a priority, with tough laws imposed on those who drive stoned. And unfortunately, the testing laws are being sort of pulled back because the industry knows that's an Achilles heel, because you can be affected by marijuana long after you feel high. That study after study has showed that, and that really worries the pot industry, because they used to be able to say, "Oh, you used it last week or last month, and it's still in your system because it gets absorbed in your fat, and that doesn't mean you're impaired." We actually have the science to say it could mean that you are impaired. We have a wonderful report that really is our centerpiece and report that's out there called Lessons Learned from State Marijuana Legalization, that I hope you can check out. It's free. It's on our website. It goes through data point after data point. In fact, the appendix of the book here, which again, this is my only hardcover copy because it's really not supposed to be out yet, and it's not out yet. But if you look in the appendix of this book, the entire report is updated, and it's in the appendix. So it's another great resource, I think, for you, and it's all fully cited. Scan it with your book if you want. Again, smokescreenbook.com. Our website, learnaboutsam.org, email info@learnaboutsam.org. We're very happy to help with, if you're in a community organization or whatever you need. That's what we're here for. And I think I did my goal of 30 minutes. So I want to thank Laura, and I would love to take questions. And I really appreciate all of your work, and I appreciate being invited to do this. Thank you so much.
Kevin, it's an honor to have you, and you are such a great partner, and I'm so grateful to have you as one of Johnny's ambassadors. And I hope everybody runs out and gets Smokescreen, get your copy. And I think for those who don't know about 420 Day, maybe you could just start explaining, why did you publish Smokescreen on April 20th?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So Laura will know because she's an expert. 8 books, and another one that you can pre-order on May 1st that I was honored to write the epilogue for, or the foreword for, I should say. And very, very excited about that book coming out. It's gonna be really valuable. So thank you. Laura will know, maybe others don't, that there are certain days that books are released. You can't just release it usually on any day you want with most publishers and distributors. And so this date was available. So I said, we got to grab it. And so why we grabbed it was because there has been a long-standing 420 holiday, so to speak. And Sam has always done something interesting on 420 conferences, press conference, release of something. It made sense to me that we should release this book on that day. There's a lot of lore around, why is it 420? What happened on April 20th? Probably the most credible lore is it was the time when kids in a certain high school in Northern California in the 70s used to get together and smoke marijuana. So that was a 420 holiday. Other people think it's because of laws that were on the book that are Section 420. Whatever it is, and remember, in the 1970s, we had very high levels of daily use and regular use by young people, especially high school seniors, and we're now approaching that level. A lot of people thought we would never approach that level again, that level was an old level. We would never go there. We're not only going there, folks. I hate to being the bearer of bad news. Again, the level of consumption is off the charts because of the THC levels and because of how many times a day people are now using. Really smart drug policy analysts that don't have a dog in a legalization fight, they predict something like we are now consuming 40 billion more hours of intoxication.
Wow.
Yeah, which when you quantify it like that, it's scary. So 420, because of that day, I thought it was important to take back 420 to say, we're not going to let this be just the marijuana holiday. And that's why I'm really happy to do the event with the National Marijuana Initiative, sponsored by the National Marijuana Initiative and SAM, the Johnny's Ambassadors event on 420. Please check it out if you haven't yet.
Yes, Kevin will be kicking off, and you can find that at johnnysambassadors.org. He will officially be launching his book and will open Johnny's Ambassadors. We're calling it the anti-420 Day conference, but very symbolic that your book is coming out. And so true what you say about kind of the trifecta, so to speak, of age of onset of use, high frequency, high potency equals a very deadly equation, unfortunately, for many of our youth. We have a lot of questions here.
If we can delay use until after age 21, people are unlikely ever to use.
Yes,
So it's
and if
just
they
so key.
do, yeah, the frequency of cannabis use disorder will also decrease. So we've got to keep
Absolutely.
young people from using recreationally, illegally when they're young, and doing everything we can to shout about the dangers. And we are so grateful since our mission is mostly teens. Let's see, Kevin,
Yes.
can you speak, please, about the connection between marijuana legalization and the opioid crisis?
Oh, yeah. It was one of my favorite subjects. So the marijuana movement doesn't, I mean, again, I got to hand it to them. I mean, Laura, we have to find out who's doing their PR and raise some
Uh,
money because they're brilliant at it.
uh,
And so they don't let an opportunity go by, which is a key. I mean, again, Laura is the expert in all of this, so but that is a
no.
key thing when you're trying to get the message out. You never let an opportunity pass you by.
Mhm.
They saw the opioid epidemic as a perfect opportunity to amplify their message because actually the conventional wisdom and what you would think is that marijuana is linked to the opioid epidemic in a bad way because people don't just start using opioids out of nowhere. Often marijuana is a precursor drug, whatever you want to call it, gateway, pathway, precursor to other drugs. And so the marijuana industry said, oh, okay, wait a minute, we've heard this gateway thing for years. We have to go on the offensive and say, no, not only does marijuana not lead you to other drugs ever, but it actually prevents you, they said, from using other drugs like opioids. Why? Because you don't need opioids for pain. Marijuana does a great job. So
Uh,
they went along, and there were basically two researchers that were responsible for very shoddy research. And which, by the way, they continue to unfortunately do this, those researchers, they put out a paper in 2010, what we call an ecological study, meaning they basically looked at two trends that were happening and said, ooh, they must be connected because they're happening at the same time, without looking at other things that could be happening and without realizing that, ecological studies mean you could lose what happens on the individual level. In other words, you may see something as two trends going on, but you may lose what that means for individual behavior. And so they translated a very shoddy piece of research from an ecological point of view and made it look like, oh, that means that individually people, when they use marijuana, they don't use opioids.
ah,
And what the marijuana industry did with that paper is take it and basically put that finding on billboards all over the country, starting in 20. And when I say the industry, it was mainly Weed Maps, which is basically the Yelp for marijuana. And they put these billboards up everywhere, and they did a remarkable job getting this out. Well, Stanford researchers, fast forward 8 years, said, wait a minute, we're going to redo this study because it doesn't seem right. When they redid the study, they found they were 23% more likely to use opioids if you had used
wow.
medical, in this case
Yes.
marijuana. And they also said, whether that relationship is there, we're not even sure. But at the very least, it's a spurious relationship. You cannot say that it reduces it. And then other studies came out and said, actually, this was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They said, actually, marijuana legalization appears to make, and I'm quoting them directly, appears to make the opioid epidemic worse. Then
Wow.
there have been other studies showing, even on the individual level for pain, even, which is interesting, for surgical pain and other things, those who use marijuana were more likely to use more opioids, be in the hospital longer, and have worse pain. So it even goes against this idea that this is even that great for pain. And we know that there are components of marijuana that could be good for very severe, what we call cancer pain, which is a very specific kind of pain. And again, there may be some elements to that. And I have no objection to the proper medicinal use of components of marijuana in a non-smoked way, in a way that's under the purview of your doctor, but not in the way that's in all these states where, I mean, can you imagine if we voted on medicine and said that anybody with a pulse basically could get it for any reason? I mean, that's not medicine anymore.
Yeah.
But it was camel's nose under the tent to allow for the acceptance of marijuana. And that was very smart from a PR perspective. So marijuana appears to increase your risk of using opioids, increase your risk of having pain if you are in a category like an operative or that kind of pain. It does not divert you away from opioids. And so I'm very concerned about it. And it's not a surprise to me that in this opioid epidemic, we have seen increasing levels of marijuana.
Well, and our friend, your friend and mine, Dr. Ken Finn, here in
Yes,
Colorado Springs, did a presentation for Johnny's Ambassadors and showed a chart
yes,
that showed
Yes.
an exponential increase of the use of every
Yes.
type of
Yes.
drug in
Yes.
marijuana. And shocking how that starts to ascend in
Yes.
2014, when everything
Absolutely.
came out on the market here. And in teens, the latest youth behavioral
Yes.
survey showed not alcohol, but
Yeah.
that lifetime marijuana use is the number one predictor of whether a high school senior will have abused opioids in the past 30 days.
Yep.
So replacing alcohol, lifetime use, if you've ever done it, you're
I know.
suddenly, that is a predicator of whether or not you're going to abuse opioids. So
Absolutely.
hugely problematic. And your
Absolutely.
comment about pain is really important. Did you ever read that spicy, the chili survey where they gave them,
No.
exposed them to a really
Oh,
hot pepper?
whoa.
And strangely, their perception of pain from that pepper got worse the more marijuana they used. So
Wow.
completely inverse
I hadn't seen that. Yeah. I'm not
results. I'll have to
surprised.
send you that link. That was a
Yeah.
funny one Ken Finn
Wow.
told us about. I was picturing the subjects with this hot
Yeah.
pepper just sweating and
Yeah,
smoking
I
weed at
know.
the same time and
Like
it not
hoping.
working,
Yeah, it's not
making
working.
it worse.
Oh my gosh,
That kind
that's
of gave me a
amazing.
giggle.
Yeah, I
Okay,
bet.
let's see. What, if anything, is the big and small marijuana supporter are afraid of? Why do they seem so defensive?
Hmm.
I'm sure you've got
It's a
like
great.
a target on your chest.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it that they're
Unfortunately.
afraid of people taking it away? Do they really think youth should use marijuana? Is it money?
Let me
Like,
tell you what I
why
think.
are people
It's I
so
think for a lot.
angry and defensive?
I think for some people, again, everyone, the human condition is complex, right? So we can't
Yeah.
necessarily say it's all for one. But I think for some people, for a growing number of people, and for the vocal minority who talk about this, marijuana is a religion. Okay, it is their
Mm,
religion.
mm,
You say something, anything negative, and you are going against their God. I really believe that, and it's very sad, and it
yeah.
does something to the brain. It's a great question because I once asked the head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. It's the only question I've ever asked her, Nora Volkow, where she really couldn't give me a good answer because she's a brilliant scientist. She's a
Yes,
genius.
yes, she is.
And the question was, and it was at our summit. The question was, um, why do we only see people protesting at this Capitol or state capitol, wherever, for their right to use marijuana? And yet I have never seen anybody protest for their right to use heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, let alone tobacco and alcohol. All of
Yeah,
these are very addictive drugs. Okay.
good point.
What is it about marijuana? And there was really no good answer. But again, I think part of it is there is growing acceptance and they want to feel like this is okay. We're fine. And that's like what an alcoholic tells you. I'm fine.
Right,
I can quit
right.
whenever I want, right?
Oh,
I'm
sure.
okay. Stop bugging me.
Not
Addiction
addicted.
is a disease, right? Addiction is a disease of denial. That
Yeah.
is the hallmark of addiction. And it's, of course, it will be denial among family, it will be denial among friends, it will be denial among society that wants to think, this doesn't happen in these good neighborhoods, or this can just be, you can get over it yourself. There's all kinds of levels of societal denial, but there's the denial of the individual that this is a problem. And I think all of that personally is mixed together. And then when you put all that together, you get angry
Yeah.
letters, the death threats that we get, the like you said, the target, the attacks on your family, but what the other thing I will say is for every person that has done that, let's say when we used to go to, in-person events, which I don't even remember what those are like anymore.
Right?
But
Maybe
when
someday.
we used to do those, which I hope will continue soon. So, but when that happened, sometimes I'd get people saying, I'm coming and I'm really upset and blah, blah, blah. And there would usually have to be some police protection or something because obviously, you have to tell the organizers and they would say, we need to have some police there. And there would be. But sometimes they'd be undercover, so they wouldn't even know there were police there. But the
Ah,
person would be there. And I'll tell you, 10% of the time they would ask the question that they want to ask and be hostile. 50% of the time they wouldn't ask anything and just go away afterwards. And the other 40% of the time they would actually come up to me, not saying that, I'm convinced or you're right necessarily, but with a conciliatory tone saying, you know what? okay, I kind of get what you're saying now. I don't fully agree. For someone to change their mind, there's a whole
Wow.
psychology about that, which we won't get
Yes.
into, but that's a very difficult thing for people to do. To change
Oh, yeah.
long-standing beliefs is very difficult. And for a lot of them, they begun that. So it's oftentimes a lot of bark and not a lot of bite, but I knock on wood when I say that because it only takes one bite for something to happen. But
Yeah.
it's very interesting how that goes. It's a great question.
Well, and we sure appreciate all of us who are in the business of trying to protect our youth from the harms of marijuana and the public and public health and safety. I mean, all of us just
Yeah.
really appreciate your thick skin because, people are
Yeah.
vile and
Yeah.
mean. And in a way, you kind of want to say, well, looks like marijuana's not working for you,
Or
but you
it's
can't.
not chilling you. Let me tell you, it is not chilling a lot of people out. I wish it would, because then they
It's like,
wouldn't be.
wait, I thought you were supposed to be mellow.
Well, I will say, number one, we know marijuana doesn't make folks mellow. There's a lot of good research on the paranoia and even the violence and the things that we're seeing, and
Yes.
that's some of that. But then we have to remember, we are often seeing polysubstance abuse. So
Mhm.
these are
Yes.
this idea, we have, because we look at all the stats and everyone looks at the statistics and whatnot, and a lot of us think, and I'm included, like sometimes I get into this mode where it's like, okay, like marijuana here, cocaine here, meth here, opioids here, this. And yes, where some people that is the case, but most often than not, we're talking about this manifesting itself across substances. And,
Uh,
there is a role that each drug plays that's somewhat different and whatnot, but we have to remember that we're often talking about polysubstance abuse.
you're right. You're right. And so there could be other things on board when
Absolutely.
there is such an outburst as we see in writing, verbally, and on social media.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
thank you for tolerating that on our behalf.
Sure. Sure. My
I live in
pleasure.
New York State where marijuana just became legal. I am part of a prevention coalition. How do you suggest we focus our prevention efforts if we cannot change the local laws? We
Yeah.
feel that the revenue gained from it being legal will stop any restriction laws. What's happening right now in
Yeah.
New York State?
Well, it's great. It's my state now. So,
Yeah.
if I don't know you, please email us at info@learnaboutsam.org, because we have a specific sort of strategy for New York. We basically, in New York, we have 9 months to go, or 8 months now, to where localities, not counties, but villages, towns, cities, can ban the sales of marijuana. And in the majority of localities in any state in the country that's legalized, that has happened. So this
Good.
idea that, well, but then they won't get the revenue. Actually, if people will ban it, they'll ban it. It's not about the revenue. They realize, it's what revenue? I mean, you have to account the costs. I mean, so Laura, you should have tons of revenue. I mean,
Oh,
do you
yeah.
guys did you double your pay for your teachers? They're not on strike. I mean,
You
where's
don't
all
have
the money?
people in the emergency room. You don't
Right,
have any public health issues,
right.
car
Exactly.
crashes, nothing.
Exactly. And that money goes into a black hole, and there are costs. And so, I think you still have to try for the local opt out, number
Okay,
one.
that's
Number
great.
two, there's still a lot of work you could do. In fact, I always tell people, because people say, well, Kevin, are you just going to like stop working in our state because we legalized? So aren't you going to go home now? And they'll
No,
say,
your
no,
white
we need to
underbelly.
double down our efforts. We have to
Right.
redouble, because that means we have to work on prevention. Listen, I've said this a lot. We don't stop. I don't care what law's on the books. I don't care if it's 50 years in prison for a joint, or we're handing free joints out, which unfortunately is happening. And
It
the
is.
free samples in Colorado of edibles that are out there
Ugh.
are horrendous. So I don't care where you are on the spectrum in terms of where your policies are. There will always be work to do. In fact, there's more work to do when it's
Agreed.
that open. And that's why, Johnny's Ambassadors and other groups are so important. So there will
Yeah.
be a lot of group work for you to do in prevention. We got to prevent young people. We got to prevent driving. We got to prevent workforce stuff. There's a lot to do, but I wouldn't really throw in the towel on the opt out just yet.
Okay, that's important. And in Colorado, here we are, how many years later, right? And we're still introducing bills, trying to, I mean, not me, our
No,
partners
no,
in
no.
policy.
Yeah,
And I've been testifying to one-on-one with a lot of Congress
oh, I'm
people.
sure.
Talk to your senators, talk to your representatives,
I'm
get
sure.
on with the Attorney General's office,
Yes,
and
yes.
make
You have
noise
to.
and start, getting your allies in place.
Yes.
All the work that's being done here by Sam and, all of our other local policy groups are going to be critical to try to protect teens. And there's so much you can do, not only just decreasing the THC potency, but for example, stopping them from going from dispensary to dispensary from dispensary and buying without any tracking mechanisms. And so there's still a lot of things that will have to be done in New York after this. What is your position, Kevin, on, is it legalization but regulation very strictly, or is it more of a prohibition, or is it don't be legal at all? Like, what is Sam's official position?
Sam's official position is that legalization means commercialization, so we don't like it. Period. But we also don't want people thrown in prison or given arrest records for low-level use. We want people to get help. This is a health issue. We need people to get help if they're using. And so we don't want, your lives ruined by a criminal record for a mistake you make. But we also don't want to be promoting it by legalizing. Now, some people will say, well, what if you could legalize it and not have commercialization? Like, what if you had a state-owned store with, I've never seen, state-owned alcohol, you still have commercialization. You still have the state selling it and making money off of it. In other words, they want you to use it because they're making money. I don't like that. I also don't think it's viable. It's not going to happen with marijuana. The laws being written are all about the commercialization. And then some people say, well, why don't you sit down and write the better law then? Okay, give me $50 million and we'll try it in one state. But right now, it's not happening. And so do I prefer a state-owned model? If I had a gun to my head and it was either commercialization or state-owned, sure, I'll take state-owned in that case. But the reality of society, that is not the reality. That's not realistic. What's realistic is, only realistic in this issue is the commercialization. And that's why we oppose legalization.
Well, and look what happened in Canada, the state selling shatter to 19-year-olds, many of whom are part of Johnny's ambassadors who have had psychosis, right?
And the state doing very little in any of these places to do prevention and anything like that on top of it. So.
What do you see now with the Biden administration? There's a lot of rumor that he is staying the course on marijuana legalization, and then others saying, no, it's inevitable that it will be legalized federally. You have an opinion?
I don't have a crystal ball in politics. If I did,
the president.
I would have projected 2016 would have been a lot different. I think a lot of people would have done that, right? The prediction politics, that 2016 showed me you can never predict anything in politics. So number one. Number two, in terms of where the president is, I am grateful that the other than Mike Bloomberg, the only Democratic nominee for president to say specifically that he is not in favor of marijuana legalization is our current president. So that is a good thing to me. No, obviously the vice president did later. This was not an issue for her in California. It very easily could be. She actually was against it early on, which is, I think, shows where her real feelings were. And then when it became politically popular and she thought inevitable, she went to the other side on it. So I don't think she's a true believer, actually, and that's going to be controversial for some people, but I do not think she's a true believer on this. But she was in favor when she ran, and she sponsored it in the Senate. So I'm not discounting that. I don't think the Democrats have the votes to do it because we've talked to many Democratic senators who are against it. And so there's a lot of them that don't like this. There's certainly not 50 that like it, and you probably need 10 more Republicans, which is also not going to happen anytime soon. That being said, who knows what will happen? Politics, what deals will be made, what will happen at the last minute? I can't predict that. But I don't think we are there yet. And we may not be there. Remember, we all thought it would be legal, or people thought it would be legal. I wasn't born then, in the 1970s. And they, in fact, the president supported at the time legalization. And then later, I have to say, one of the best sort of feelings I had was seeing the about face. In fact, the first quote on the back of the book is when President Carter, right there, the first one, if people can read it, is when President Carter actually commended Sam and the work we were doing. And he said he doesn't think it's going to work in Colorado. This is 2014. And I was at a meeting of about 30 people with him on it. So.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see. You have a nice comment here. I'm so happy a neighbor suggested this webinar. It is my first time really understanding how bad this problem is. In our little town, we recently had a store open called Cookies. Most of us thought it was a new bakery specializing in cookies. We were shocked to find it is a marijuana store in our downtown, and there's a huge sign that says cookies. Is there anything we can do? This is in Oregon.
Well, my first idea is let's do a GoFundMe. If you, and I don't know what you're doing for your job, but maybe we could do a GoFundMe because there's people want to lease to small businesses. Get a tiny little shop right next to it and actually sell cookies. You'll make good money and you'll take it all away from and they're doing your PR because it's called cookies, so they're going to think that you could just kind of in multiple levels take cookies back, because who doesn't like good cookies, right? I mean, I love good cookie, okay? And so this angers me, and so that to be honest, I think that would be really cool. And I'll give money to it, and we'll
That'd be great.
I'm gonna say Laura will give some money to it. We'll make cookies happen.
I'll support it.
But in reality, what you can do is, and again, I still think that is reality, but if you don't want to do that, if you're busy, you could, if it's a small town, you could still spread the word about the harms. You could, you could stage some protests, go to the city council. Who gave them the zoning permit? Who allowed them to do this? Has there been a vote in your town about whether you should have a pot shop or not? Like, why can't there be another vote? Like, you can use this actually as a galvanizing way. And we have a free, and I should have mentioned this, local control toolkit on our website. It's one of the proudest things that we've done, I think, because it is hands-on, practical. How do you organize on the local level to stop pot shops? Check that out.
Okay, wonderful. I will get that for everyone and put that on the page with this recording. We also have the lessons learned report that will be provided to everyone who's on today and also who's watching this recording. So we'll grab that. As well. Someone commented they have a fruit factory, very similar to the cookies. So same thing. Someone asked about to repeat about your religion, and everybody will get a copy of this recording. There's a comment that's saying, I agree that for some people, marijuana is a religion. A soccer dad from my daughter's team told me last week he didn't believe in God right after he refused to visit Johnny's Ambassador's website for education about marijuana after telling me he was 53 and smoking marijuana in the Netherlands since he was 12, and nothing is wrong with it. And I am like a flat earther nutcase for suggesting otherwise. He said he knew everything there was to know about marijuana and there was no need for him to do any more research. I told him I knew 3 families whose kids died from marijuana use in the past 2 years, and he got incredibly mad and called me a liar. Anyway, unbelievable. My son got hostile and nuts on marijuana. So Kevin, people are agreeing with you. I think your comment about it being a religion is really kind of resonating.
Well, I would go to that per dad with all due respect and say, unless the AMA, the NIH, the CDC, the WHO, I mean, I don't care if you're on the right or the left, any of the health care, unless they think we also, they're a flat earther. I mean, it's just, the science is clear. These organizations are clear about the harms. So it's ironic that he's calling you a flat earther. Unfortunately, he's the flat earther because he's denying the science. And I'd also buy him a book and buy him Laura's book and give it to them for Christmas or for whatever holiday and see what happens.
Kevin's book, Smokescreen, and then on July 10th, 7/10 Dab Day, we will have Kevin's forward in my book, The Dangerous Truth About Today's Marijuana, Johnny Stack's Life and Death Story. So you can buy both books, wrap them up, and give them to him with real cookies at the next soccer game. I think that would be fantastic.
That's a great idea.
That's the next one. Let's see, someone's saying they use your local toolkit. Thank you. And one more question. Oh, how do I buy the book? Well, they can go to smokescreenbook.com. They can grab it on Amazon, but I think if they go to Smokescreen Book before Tuesday, they can get some goodies, right? Free bonus.
They can, yeah. If you buy the book and then go to smokescreenbook.com and enter in the details with your receipt, you'll get some goodies even before it comes out. You'll get a couple of the chapters online. I also will say I did the audiobook for this, which is a whole other story of how to do that in a pandemic. But anyway, it happened. So it's also on Audible. You lost my voice. Had to. That's we'll talk about that. I know we're over time, but it was
We'll talk about
again
that.
doing it. Basically creating my own professional studio because of the pandemic, but it
Oh,
worked. So
hey, we're all doing what we need to do right now.
I know.
Well, Kevin, I just want to thank you. The whole experience, obviously, with Johnny has been
Yeah.
tragic beyond measure and horrific. And I've met a lot of amazing people, one of them including you. And I'm so grateful for your partnership.
Thank you. I feel the same.
And everyone is saying thank you so much. Everybody get to smokescreenbook.com, buy Kevin's book.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to
Thank
be
you.
here. Thank you for your voice.
Thanks for being one of Johnny's ambassadors, Kevin. Take
Absolutely.
care,
Very
everyone.
proudly.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.